When I entered the hospital, I never imagined that my own daughter-in-law would be the one to turn her back on me. But that's exactly what happened. She walked into my room, looked me straight in the eyes and said, "If you can't take care of yourself, don't bother me." Those words hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't the first time I felt like a burden, but it was the first time it was said so plainly. I thought to myself, this is it. This is where I stand with my family now. Before I continue, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you don't miss the rest of my story. I never thought I'd find myself in this position, alone in a hospital bed, with only the echo of my own thoughts for company. My son, who I raised and loved, didn't even have the decency to visit. He didn't know, or maybe didn't care, that his wife's words would cut deeper than any physical ailment I could be suffering from. I had spent so many years caring for others, but now as I lay here I couldn't help but wonder, where did it all go wrong? I had hoped, prayed even, that my family would be there for me when I needed them the most, but instead, I was left to face this hospital room alone. I thought back to all the holidays I spent cooking meals, cleaning up after everyone, keeping the peace. I never asked for much, just a little appreciation. But now as I lay here, the reality was clear. My son was too busy, and my daughter-in-law was too indifferent. The same woman who had once called me family now barely looked me in the eye, let alone offered a hand when I needed it. Was this the result of my sacrifices? Was it all for nothing? I thought of all the birthdays, all the family gatherings I had hosted, making sure everyone was happy, even at the cost of my own happiness. But no one had bothered to ask how I was feeling, how I was doing. I had given so much of myself, and now all I had left was a bed in a sterile room and a heart full of unanswered questions. The silence in that room grew louder, almost suffocating. I couldn't help but replay the words she had said over and over again in my mind. "If you can't take care of yourself, don't bother me." I had raised my son with love and care, and this was how I was repaid. This was the reality I had to accept. Or was it? Something inside me stirred, a feeling I hadn't had in years. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something stronger, more determined. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not anymore. I wasn't going to be a helpless old woman who just took what she was given. I had been strong my whole life, and I would find that strength again. Maybe it wasn't too late to reclaim my place, to remind them who I was and what I was capable of. Maybe this hospital bed wasn't just a place of sickness. Maybe it was where I would find the strength to change everything. This was far from over. The days that followed were filled with silence. I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling, each passing minute feeling like an eternity. The room was cold, the beeping of the machines my only company. It was strange how I could be surrounded by so much technology, yet feel so alone. The nurses came in, did their job, and left. My son David didn't even return my calls. It was like I didn't exist. I kept thinking about that moment, the words my daughter-in-law Karen had said to me. I could still hear them echoing in my mind. "If you can't take care of yourself, don't bother me." She didn't even seem to care. It wasn't like I expected her to throw herself at my feet, but a little compassion, a little concern. Was that too much to ask for? The more I thought about it, the more the hurt settled in. This wasn't just a moment of frustration. It was the realization that the family I had spent my whole life supporting was falling apart. It hurt, but I didn't let it show. I couldn't. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I had always been the one to hold everything together. The one who made sure the house was running smoothly, that everyone was taken care of, that the meals were prepared, the laundry done, the holidays planned. I had been the rock of this family, and now it seemed like I was nothing more than a burden. My mind wandered back to the times when David was little. I had sacrificed so much for him. I had stayed up late, helped with homework, listened to his problems, cheered him on at every game, and always made sure he knew how much he was loved. I thought that love would be enough. But now, here I was, alone in this hospital room, forgotten. I started to wonder if it had all been for nothing. If I had been foolish to believe that family would always be there for me. Had I spent all those years giving and giving, only to be cast aside when I needed them most? It was then that I realized I couldn't stay in this bed, wallowing in self-pity. I had to do something. I wasn't going to let Karen and David, my own son, treat me like this. I had to regain control of my life. They thought I was weak, that I would just take whatever they threw at me, but they were wrong. I had more strength in me than they realized. I wasn't going to let them win. I would find a way to get back on my feet, to show them that I was still capable. But first, I needed to get out of this hospital. I needed to prove to myself that I was still in charge of my own life, even if no one else saw it. So I made a plan. A small plan, but a plan nonetheless. I would walk out of here with my head held high. And maybe, just maybe, I would find the strength to rebuild what was broken. It had been a few days since I left the hospital. My body still ached, but my mind was clearer. I wasn't going to let Karen or David treat me like this anymore. The first step was simple. I needed to regain control over my own life, to show them I was still capable, still strong. But it wasn't going to be easy. I knew I couldn't do it alone. I started by making a few calls. I had a few old friends who had been there for me in the past. People who remembered the strong woman I used to be, the woman who had always been there for everyone else. I had to remind myself that I still had value, that I wasn't just someone to be forgotten. The first person I reached out to was Linda, my best friend from church. We hadn't talked much in the last couple of years, not since David and Karen had gotten so busy with their own lives. But I needed her now. She was the one person who understood me, who didn't see me as a burden. We set up a lunch at a little cafe I used to love. The moment I walked in, I saw her sitting at a table by the window, her warm smile welcoming me. I could feel the weight of the last few days lift just by being in her presence. "Martha, it's so good to see you," she said, standing up to hug me. We sat down, and I couldn't help but notice how much she looked the same, like no time had passed at all. But as I looked at her, I also realized how much I had changed. I wasn't the same woman I used to be. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently, sensing the heaviness in my heart. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I've been better," I said, my voice steady, but with a tinge of sadness. "I've had some difficult moments lately." Linda nodded, her eyes soft with understanding. "I can imagine. But you're strong, Martha. You've always been strong." I smiled, though it felt like I was forcing it. The truth was, I wasn't sure if I was strong anymore. I felt like I had been drained, like I had given so much of myself to others that there was nothing left for me. But Linda was right about one thing. I had always been strong. And maybe, just maybe, that strength was still in me somewhere. We talked for a while, catching up on old memories, but I couldn't help but feel that sense of urgency inside me. I had to do something. I couldn't keep waiting for things to change. I had to make a change. As I left the cafe, I felt something stir inside me, something that hadn't been there in a long time. It was a feeling of determination, a spark of hope. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for my family to come around. I was going to take control of my own life. I was going to prove to myself and to them that I could still stand on my own 2 feet. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to face it. The days passed slowly, but with each one, I felt a small piece of my old self return. It wasn't easy, but I had made a decision. I wasn't going to sit back and let them continue to treat me like this. I was going to fight for what I deserved, and for the first time in a long time I felt a spark of hope. The next step was clear. I had to start setting boundaries. The thought of confronting David and Karen terrified me, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had to. I wasn't going to keep being ignored. I wasn't going to let them push me aside just because I was getting older. I needed to show them that I still had a voice, that I was still capable of standing up for myself. The next time David called, I decided it was time to talk. I had been avoiding his calls for days, but now I was ready. "Hello, Mom." David's voice came through the phone, warm but distant. It was strange how little I recognized the tone anymore. There was a time when his voice would bring comfort, but now it only reminded me of the distance between us. "David," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you." There was a slight pause on the other end, and I could hear him shift. "What's going on?" His voice was casual, as if nothing had changed. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I don't appreciate the way you and Karen have been treating me," I said, my words sharp but calm. There was another pause, longer this time. "What are you talking about?" David asked, sounding more defensive now. "I'm not a burden," I continued. "I've spent my whole life taking care of this family, and now I'm being treated like I'm invisible." I could feel my pulse quicken as the words left my mouth. It felt good to finally say them, but I was also terrified of what he would say in response. "Mom, you know I love you," David said, but his voice sounded empty. "But you need to understand that Karen and I have our own lives now. We can't keep dropping everything just because you need help." That was it. I couldn't believe the words I was hearing. "I'm not asking for you to drop everything," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for you to be there when I need you, just like I was there for you all those years." There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I wondered if he had hung up. But then he spoke again, his voice softer. "I don't know what you want me to say, Mom." I felt a tightness in my chest. "I want you to say that you'll be there for me," I said, my voice trembling now. "That I'm not just some burden you can ignore." There was another long silence, and then David finally spoke. "I'll think about it," he said, his tone still distant. "But you have to understand that we have a lot going on." I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stared out the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I've always understood," I finally said. "But I'm not going to let you forget that I'm your mother." I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was a start. I wasn't going to let them keep pushing me around. It was time to start standing up for myself. And I was ready to do whatever it took to make sure they knew I still had a place in this world. The days that followed felt like a blur. I was still recovering physically, but mentally I was a different person. Every day I focused on getting stronger, on rebuilding my sense of self. The tension between me and David had been building, and although he hadn't said much since our last conversation, I could feel the distance growing. Karen, however, had become colder. Her silence spoke volumes. It was as if she were pretending I didn't exist. I had seen the signs of her manipulation before, but this was different. It wasn't just her indifference, it was her quiet disdain. I thought back to all those years when I had done everything for them, always putting them first, sacrificing my own needs, my own time, all while never asking for anything in return. I had raised David with love and care, but somewhere along the way he had forgotten what it meant to be there for someone who had given so much. But I wasn't going to let this continue. I refused to be invisible in my own family. I had spent too long living in the background, letting others dictate my worth. I wasn't going to let David and Karen, or anyone else for that matter, take away my sense of self. It was time for a change. One afternoon, as I was sipping my coffee in the kitchen, I heard the doorbell ring. It was unexpected. I walked to the door, my heart beating a little faster. When I opened it, I found a man standing on the doorstep, a man I hadn't seen in years. It was Martin, the attorney who had handled my late husband's estate. I hadn't expected to see him again, not like this. "Martha," he said, a somber look in his eyes. "May I come in?" I stepped aside to let him in, my mind racing. "Of course, Martin. What brings you here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to talk to you about something important," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "It's about your late husband's will." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't thought about the will in months. After Noel passed away, I had just been trying to get through each day. The thought of his will and the inheritance had barely crossed my mind. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Martin paused, then spoke in a calm but firm voice. "There are some clauses in the will that your son and daughter-in-law have overlooked. They've been making decisions without consulting you, and I believe you have a right to know what's really happening with the estate." My mind raced as I processed his words. David and Karen had been acting as if everything was theirs for the taking, as if I no longer had a place in the family, but now I was learning that there was more to the story. I hadn't known what was really in the will, but now it seemed that my late husband had made provisions for me that I hadn't even realized. Martin handed me a set of papers. "These are the documents. I suggest you read them carefully," he said. I felt a rush of emotions, a mixture of disbelief, anger, and even a bit of hope. Could it be that Noel had anticipated this? Had he known that his son and wife might try to push me aside? As I glanced at the papers, I realized that Noel had left me something important, something that could change everything. I felt a surge of determination. I wasn't going to let David and Karen take what was mine, and I wasn't going to let them control my life any longer. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I was going to fight back. No more being the silent observer. No more letting them call the shots. It was time for me to take a stand. The next day, I sat at the kitchen table, the documents Martin had given me spread out in front of me. The reality of what I was holding started to sink in. Noel had anticipated everything. He had known that things might get complicated after his passing, and he had made sure to secure my place, even if David and Karen didn't want to acknowledge it. I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: relief, anger, and even a sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. My husband had always been a man of integrity, and he had taken steps to ensure that I wouldn't be forgotten, even if it came down to this, if it came down to me standing up for myself when no one else would. I spent the next few hours carefully reading through the papers. There were clauses that specifically addressed my well-being and financial support, but it was more than just money. It was a statement that my voice mattered, that my needs weren't to be dismissed just because I was getting older. He had left me the family home, a place that meant more to me than anything else. It wasn't just a house. It was where we had built our life together, where we had raised our son, and where I had invested my heart and soul. It was mine legally and morally, and no one, certainly not David or Karen, could take that away from me. I couldn't help but smile as I thought about the look on their faces when they realized what was in these documents. They had been so certain that they could control everything, that I would just fade into the background as they took over. But now it was clear who had the power. I wasn't going to sit idly by while they tried to erase me. I wasn't going to let them believe that I was weak, that I had no place in this family. I had earned my place here. I had earned the right to be heard, to be respected, and to be supported. I picked up the phone and dialed David's number. My hands shook, not from fear but from anticipation. I had to make this right, and it started with him. The phone rang several times before he picked up. "Mom." His voice was guarded, as if he wasn't sure what to expect. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. "I've been going through the will, and there are some things I think you need to know." I could hear him hesitate on the other end. "What about it?" he asked. "I don't think you understand just how much your father and I built together," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. "The house is mine. The estate is mine. And I won't be pushed out." There was a long silence before David spoke again. "Mom, I don't know what you're trying to do, but I don't think you understand the situation," he said, his voice a little more defensive now. "I understand perfectly well, David. What I don't understand is why you think you can just take everything like I don't matter anymore." I paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "I raised you. I sacrificed for you. And I'm not going to let you treat me like this." I could feel the weight of my words as they hung between us. "We'll talk about this when I get back," David said, his voice more strained now. "I think it's already clear, David. This isn't about talking anymore. It's about respect." I hung up the phone, feeling a wave of strength wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the helpless mother or grandmother. I was Martha Williams, and I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they were, walk all over me. I was ready to take my life back. The days that followed felt like a strange mix of tension and quiet resolve. David had been distant since our conversation, and though I couldn't see him, I could feel the shift in the air. Karen, on the other hand, avoided me altogether. It was like we were living in different worlds, where I was the invisible one, no longer part of their plans. But the truth was, I was done being the passive observer in my own life. I had learned that silence wasn't always golden. Sometimes it was a tool for manipulation, and I wasn't going to let anyone use it against me anymore. The phone call had been a wake-up call. I wasn't going to let them make decisions for me, not anymore. The next day, I decided to take the first step. I gathered the documents Martin had given me and made an appointment with a lawyer. It wasn't easy. I had never been one to seek confrontation or make a scene, but the reality was I needed to protect myself. The lawyer's office was quiet, the air filled with the soft hum of conversation and the rustling of papers. When I sat down across from him, I felt a small flutter of anxiety, but it was quickly replaced by determination. "I'm here because I need to understand my rights," I said, my voice steady. The lawyer nodded. flipping through the papers in front of him. Your husband made sure you're well taken care of, Martha. You have a legal right to the estate. And it's clear he wanted to ensure you weren't left without support. His words were reassuring, but they also brought up something else. Something I hadn't fully realized until now. David and Karen had been acting like they were in control, but they hadn't even read the will fully. They hadn't seen the clauses that protected me. And now it was time for them to understand that I wasn't someone they could push around. What do I do next? I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. You need to make sure everything is in your name. You have the right to the house, the financial support, and more. If you want, we can file some papers to make things official. The lawyer's words hit me like a wave. Official. It was time to take control of everything that had been left to me. I wasn't just going to wait for them to realize their mistake. I was going to make sure they understood the consequences of their actions. After I left the lawyer's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't sure how David and Karen would react when they found out, but I knew I was doing the right thing. I was finally standing up for myself, and I wasn't going to back down. That evening, I sat down in the living room, staring at the family pictures on the wall. The memories were bittersweet. I had spent so many years building this life, and now it seemed like everyone was willing to tear it down for their own gain. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had been a part of this family for so long, and no one was going to take that away from me. Not even David. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. I knew there would be backlash, and I knew that Karen would try to manipulate David into siding with her. But I was ready. I had to be. For my own peace of mind, for my dignity, and for the life I had built. I wasn't going to lose it all over someone else's greed. It was time for me to claim what was rightfully mine. The phone call came a few days later. I had been waiting for it, but still, when the screen lit up with David's name, my heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure what he was going to say. I wasn't sure what he expected from me. But I knew that this was the moment I had been waiting for. Mom, can we talk? David's voice came through the phone, calm but tense. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. Of course, I replied, my voice steady. What's going on? Look, I've been thinking, he began, about the will and everything. I've been wrong. My chest tightened at his words, but I forced myself to stay calm. Go on, I said, keeping my voice level. I didn't know everything. That was in it, David admitted. I didn't know Dad had set things up this way. I thought you were just being difficult. I could hear the guilt in his voice, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. I had been right all along, and still it took him this long to realize. David, I said, my voice softer now. I've spent my whole life supporting this family, making sure everyone was okay. And when I needed help, when I needed my family, you turned away. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he might hang up. But then he spoke again. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly. I never meant to hurt you. I was just lost, I guess. Everything's been changing so fast. I know, I said, feeling a lump in my throat. But I don't need to be lost. I need to know that I'm still part of this family. That I matter. You do, David said, his voice breaking slightly. You always have. I've just been too blind to see it. I let out a shaky breath. I don't want your pity, David, I said, feeling tears well up in my eyes. I want respect. I want to know that you care. I do care, he replied quickly. I promise. I don't know what to do to make up for it, but I'm going to try. That's all I need to hear, I said softly, wiping a tear from my cheek. I just need to know that you're here, that you're not going to walk away from me again. The conversation ended, but it didn't feel like the end of the story. It felt like a beginning, a new chapter for us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. There were still things to work through, but this conversation, this small step toward reconciliation, gave me hope. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. But I also knew that I wasn't going to be the one who gave up. I wasn't going to let go of my family without a fight. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was winning. The next few weeks were filled with more conversations, more honesty, more understanding. David began to visit more often, and Karen, though reluctant, started to open up. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the forgotten mother-in-law. the old woman waiting to be cast aside. I had found my place again, and I had earned it. And as I sat in my living room watching my son and daughter-in-law sit across from me, I realized something important. Family wasn't about giving up. It was about fighting even when it seemed impossible. It was about standing your ground, demanding respect, and knowing that you were worth it. I wasn't just their mother or their mother-in-law. I was Martha Williams, and I wasn't going anywhere. As the weeks passed, things slowly started to settle. David and Karen began making more of an effort. It wasn't perfect, but I could see the change in their attitudes. David called more often, not just to check in, but to actually talk, to reconnect. Karen, though still reserved, seemed more aware of my presence in their lives. It wasn't the easy, effortless closeness we once had, but it was a step toward healing. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was truly part of something, like I mattered. I found myself looking at the family pictures on the wall with a new sense of pride, knowing that I had fought for my place and had earned it back. I had spent so many years putting everyone else's needs first, sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of family. But I had learned a valuable lesson through all of this. It wasn't selfish to take care of myself. It wasn't wrong to ask for respect and love in return for all that I had given. I had allowed myself to be pushed aside, to be ignored, but now I had finally found my voice again. And that made all the difference. There were still challenges ahead, I knew that. But I had learned to stand my ground, to fight for what was rightfully mine, and to demand the respect I deserved. As I sat in the living room that afternoon, watching the sun set through the window, I realized that life wasn't about waiting for people to change. It was about changing myself, about finding my strength, and using it to create the life I deserved. I wasn't a victim, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small again. I was Martha Williams, and I had finally taken control of my own story. But that left me wondering as I looked around at my family, how many others are out there waiting to be seen, waiting to be heard? How many of us have let others walk over us, thinking we had no choice, when in reality the power to change our circumstances was always within us? The journey doesn't end here. Not for me and not for anyone who's ever felt overlooked. The question is, when will you start standing up for yourself? When will you take back your voice, your place, your power? Because it's never too late to take control, to make sure you're not forgotten. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new stories.